Hi everybody, you've reached the channel High Voltage, and this is a part-time book club. If I'm not reading, or I'm giving my opinion, or I'm dancing, or I'm trying to sing, and I'm a novice entertainer, and I'm wearing bifocals. So let's just get into where we left off yesterday with Ask Not. It was a 10-minute read, and I did it behind the camera, as to not distract from talking. All right. You like the purple nail polish? Purple nurple. Purple nurple. All right. Okay, where we left off was Teddy escapes, blonde drowns. Those words were buried under the top story. JFK's dream realized, the front pages of every newspaper in America with astonishing images. Men walk on moon. The American flag had been planted there. All the astronauts survived. The country was turning toward futurism again and hope. What was Bran Kennedy if not for those very things? I said that on slow on purpose to emphasize the words. If Ted could tap into the regard felt for Jack and Bobby, could lean in to his promise as the last Kennedy brother and the bridge, as it were, to a new decade, well, maybe he had a good shot at getting out of this. Better than good, actually. Now, this is when Ted Kennedy has, after flown the car over the bridge with Mary Jo Kopechne, and it's in the last readings. I highly suggest you listen to them. I really do. And if you don't want to listen to any of my readings from the past, go to another channel and catch up, and then head back. And if you choose to subscribe, I really thank you. And in the last 2 weeks, 40 people have subscribed, and I usually know everybody's name. So for those of you that are new subscribers or thinking about subscribing, start with popular short videos or popular videos. And it's always the ones that you least expect that get the most sort of, the best content is when you least expect it. At any rate, so, and I also recommended in my reading yesterday to watch the movie Chappaquiddick. Okay? I have to find out the actor's name, but he was also in Everest. He was in a movie with Jessica Chastain called Black 00 Black, and it was about a CIA agent hunting down Bin Laden. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that. Anyways, so the death of Mary Jo Kopechne, just as a recap, was on July the 19th of 1969, and the moon landing was July 20th of 1969. Now, you know that song that I like by Joni Mitchell, and She Wanted to Be Free, and I sing it, or I dance to Joni Mitchell in the cactus tree while she was somewhere being free. Okay, that song is in a movie called Blue Moon Junction, and that's where Viggo Morrison and Diane Lane have a really hot love scene watching the moon landing. That's how I remembered, actually. So the American flag had been planted there. Okay, so my head, so this is back to Ted Kennedy about his odds getting through this crime. My head was throbbing and my neck was aching, Ted testified. I was breathless and, at the time, hopelessly exhausted. Ted said he gave up and floated the 50 or so feet to shore, then rested for about 20 minutes before jumping back into the Poucha Pond. Not to rescue Mary Jo, still struggling to breathe, but to swim the length of 2.5 football field ride. Oh, I know what she's trying to say. He swam 2 football fields to the other side of the island, which was Edgar Island. There he stood, dripping wet, issuing one command: "Get me Markham!" So that was the fix-it boy. This was Senator Paul Markham, a former U.S. prosecutor from Massachusetts. He was Ted's other fixer. And you know what fixers do? They do anything from running coffee to other things, nefarious activities. It's true. It's true. You're not going to believe this part. Okay. Ted's cousin Joey. Oh, I remember in Chippewatic, he kept, Joey. And Joey tried to talk Ted into turning himself in. We'll get there, and if it's not in here, I'll go through it. All right. The 3 men piled into a Python Valiant parked outside and raced to the scene. Gargan and Markin stripped down and went into the pond while Ted stood on the bridge and watched as they tried to save Mary Jo, but they weren't trained first responders. They had no idea how to execute a water rescue. "Oh my God," Ted said, looking up at the sky. "What am I going to do? What am I going to do? I. Kennedy should be not with the Y, but with an I. It should be Kennedy, I's. God. Against the advice of the smartest Kennedy advisors, current and former, Ted decided to deliver an emergency television address 1 week after the crash. There's so much more to this than what she's saying. For most of these men, it was a real reckoning with the Kennedys to a 1. They had been repulsed that Ted asked why he couldn't say Mary Jo had been driving that night. JFK's most veteran speechwriter, Ted Sorensen, wrote Ted's address to the nation. It went, in part, "I made immediate and repeated efforts to save Mary Jo by diving into the strong and murky current, but succeeded not. It was too hard, only to increase my state of utter exhaustion and alarm. My conduct and conversations during the next several hours, to the extent that I can remember them, make no sense to me at all." I wish I could do a Boston accent. "Although my doctors informed me that I suffered a cerebral concussion, as well as shock, I do not seek to escape responsibility for my actions by placing the blame either on the physical and emotional trauma brought on by the accident or on anyone else. I regard as indefensible the fact that I did not report the accident to the police immediately. Instead of looking directly for a phone after lying exhausted in the grass for an unestimated time," so clever, eh? Unestimated time, "I walked back to the cottage where the party was being held and requested the help of 2 friends, my cousin cousin Joseph Gargan and Paul Markham. And they were disgusted by him, by the way. And they begged Ted to read the truthful speech, but he didn't. Ted Kennedy. And then he sat in frickin' Congress and drilled, and Joe Biden drilled Anita Hill on whether she was telling the frickin' truth or not. And we still have Clarence Thomas there. Or I think Clarence Thomas must have passed. But at any rate, here we go. And directed them to return immediately to the scene with me. This was some time after midnight, in order to undertake a new effort to dive down and locate Miss Kopechny. Their strenuous efforts undertaken at some risk to their own lives, only to prove futile. But when the proper excavators came, she could have lived if he had called for help right away. Because she suffocated to death, she did not drown. And 6'2", strong athlete, and he couldn't go into 3 feet of water and pull her out. That's a psychopath for you, right here. All kinds of, reading his thing is like, makes me want to vomit. All kinds of scrambled thoughts, all of them confused, some of them irrational, many of them which I cannot recall, and some of which I would not have seriously entertained under normal circumstances, went through my mind during this period. They were reflected in the various inexplicable, inconsistent, and in convulsive things I said and did, including such questions as whether the girl might still be alive somewhere under that immediate area, whether some awful curse did actually hang over the Kennedys, whether there was some justifiable reason for me to doubt what had happened and delay my report, whether somehow the awful weight of this incredible incident might in some way pass from my shoulders. Today, as I mentioned, I felt morally obligated to plead guilty to the charge of leaving the scene of an accident. No words on my part can possibly express the terrible pain and suffering I feel over this tragic accident. The last week had been an agonizing one, and for the members of my family. Ted Sorensen, forever regretting writing that speech, which did little to help Ted's case. After his broadcast, polls showed that 51% of Americans did not believe him. At the inquest, John Farrar, the diver who recovered Mary Jo's body the afternoon, testified that Mary Jo had not drowned but had been suffocated to death. He said she had been alive for at least an hour in the water, maybe longer. That didn't matter to Ted. He was sticking to his story. Just like my doctor stuck to his story after he stuck 2 nails in my knee, but at least I can still walk. I'd like to go take 2 nails and put them in his knee and see how he likes it. And I'd like to, resurrect Ted Kennedy and drown him for a while and see how he likes it. Hypothetically, what the hell was he thinking? God forgive them. God forgive Ted. And may Mary Jo rest in peace. No joke. This is disgusting. Was there any particular reason, Prosecutor Edmund Dennis asked Ted, why you did not call either the police or the fire department? Well, Ted testified, I intended to call for assistance and report the accident to the police within a few short moments of going back into the car. Did something transpire to prevent these to prevent this? Ted dodged and questioned. Instead, he became most talkative about his own physical pain and self-pity, and a childlike belief that the whole problem, Mary Jo's death and his responsibility for it, would just go away. He was afraid, he said, to call Mary Jo's mother. I just couldn't gain the strength within me, the moral strength to call Mrs. Kopechny at 2 o'clock in the morning and tell her daughter was dead. Instead, he called Helga Wagner. Then he went back to his room at the inn, and despite being seen by multiple witnesses at breakfast the next morning, freshly showered and shaved, neatly dressed, composed, and with a healthy appetite, Ted, instead, he had not slept the night before, tossing and turning and practicing, overwhelmed by the tragedy of loss of a very devoted friend, whose name he was unsure of and whom he had left at the bottom of a pond. That's 16 minutes straight reading. I'll be back with the Psychology of Seattle later on today. Those Kennedys are something else, eh? They are something else. Woo! What do y'all think? Leave some comments. How am I supposed to know what anybody thinks? I'm not a cyberspace mind reader. I wish I was. Maybe someday we will be. Who knows? Okay, High Voltage signing out. That's a wrap. If you choose to subscribe, thank you. If you liked any part of this video, give it a like and a comment. Yeah. I don't usually say those things, but smash the subscribe button. Don't forget to like. No, don't forget, souls. Goodbye.